The universe, in all its infinite wisdom and spectacular poor judgment, had developed a classification system for inhabited worlds. This system, maintained by the Interstellar Geological and Biological Assessment Committee, an organization whose acronym nobody dared pronounce, ranked planets on a scale from Class 1, garden paradises where the most dangerous creature was a particularly judgmental butterfly, to Class 12, hellscapes where the rocks themselves had evolved predatory instincts. Earth, humanity's cradle of civilization, held the rather impressive distinction of being classified as a Class 11 Deathworld. The committee had wanted to give it a Class 12, but that would have required acknowledging that humans had not only survived, but thrived on such a planet, which would have necessitated uncomfortable conversations about the entire classification system's validity. Bureaucrats across the galaxy had agreed. Better to just give it an 11 and move on with their lives. The Universal Collegiate Institute on Praxis 7, by contrast, existed on a Class 2 world where the weather was always pleasant. The local fauna consisted primarily of creatures that could generously be described as aggressively docile, and the student body came from approximately 47 different species, none of which had ever experienced anything more threatening than a strongly worded email. Until this semester, the administration, in what would later be described as either progressive interspecies outreach or catastrophic institutional negligence, depending on which committee report you read, had approved an exchange program with the Terran Educational Collective. They had received assurances, so many assurances, that the human student selected would be perfectly safe and completely acclimated to civilized standards and definitely not the type to accidentally cause an intergalactic incident. The administrators had nodded along to these assurances while simultaneously installing 47 additional surveillance cameras in every corridor the human would frequent, tripling their medical staff and taking out an insurance policy so comprehensive it included a clause about acts of Deathworlder. Now, 3 months into the semester, Kexalar, a Vintharian student whose species had evolved on a world where the most stressful daily occurrence was choosing which flavor of photosynthesized nutrients to absorb, sat in his advanced temporal mathematics class, trying very hard not to stare at the humans sitting 2 rows ahead. Trying and failing. It wasn't his fault, really. The human, Ripley Morrison, though she told everyone to just call her Rip, which had caused a brief panic among students who didn't understand it was merely a nickname and not a threat, had a presence that made ignoring her essentially impossible. She sat in her chair like she was occupying enemy territory, all coiled energy and casual alertness, while Professor Threnix droned on about causal loop paradoxes. She tapped her stylus against her datapad with a rhythm that seemed almost aggressive. Her eyes, and Kexalar had done extensive research on human ocular biology after that first week, moved constantly, scanning, assessing, cataloging threats in an environment that had been specifically designed to contain 0 threats. It was like watching an apex predator attend a particularly boring lecture on accounting. The temporal displacement equation, Professor Threnix warbled, his vocal sacs inflating with enthusiasm, requires us to consider the causality coefficient in relation to... Rip's stylus stopped mid-tap. Her head tilted precisely 3 degrees to the left. Every student within visual range immediately tensed. A conditioned response developed over weeks of observing her pre-action indicators. She sneezed. The sound was sharp, sudden, and caused 2 Malarian students to literally levitate 6 inches off their seats in panic. The surveillance camera in the corner immediately swiveled to focus on her, its lens zooming in while somewhere in the security office, an alarm probably started playing soft, concerned jazz music. "Sorry," Rip muttered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand in a gesture that several xenobiology students would later describe in their journals as fascinatingly unhygienic. Professor Thrennicks's eye stalks quivered. "Quite all right, Miss Morrison. Are you experiencing biological distress? Should I summon medical personnel?" "It's a sneeze, Prof. I'm good." The concept of being good, while one's respiratory system violently expelled air and foreign particles, remained alien to most of the class. But they'd learned not to ask too many questions about human biological functions. The last time someone had inquired about her planet's atmospheric composition and its effects on human evolution, Rip had spent 40 minutes explaining concepts like persistence hunting and throwing things really hard at animals until they die of exhaustion, while the entire class sat in horrified fascination. The lecture continued. The clock on the wall, a universal standard chronometer that displayed time in a format comprehensible to all species, ticked toward the end of the academic day. Kexlar took notes, occasionally glancing at Rip, who had returned to her aggressive stylus tapping while somehow also paying complete attention to the lecture. Humans, he'd learned, could multitask in ways that seemed physiologically improbable. When the session finally ended and Professor Thrennicks dismissed them with a reminder about their upcoming assignment on bootstrap paradoxes, the students filed out in their usual pattern. Give the human a respectful buffer zone of approximately 6 feet. Don't make direct eye contact unless she initiates it. And for the love of all that's holy, don't startle her. That last rule had been established in week 2 after a Glorbian student had accidentally bumped into her from behind. Rip's reaction: spinning, dropping into a crouch, and raising her hands in what the campus security footage later identified as a defensive combat posture, had been instinctual and immediate. She'd apologized profusely afterward, while the Glorbian had needed to be treated for acute stress-induced chromatophore failure. Rip gathered her materials, slinging her bag over one shoulder with that characteristic human asymmetrical carrying method that seemed designed to throw off their balance, but somehow didn't. She nodded at a few students, the ones brave or foolish enough to actually interact with her regularly, and headed toward the exit. "Same time tomorrow, yeah?" she called back to Kexlar, who'd become something like a friend through sheer persistent proximity and careful non-threatening behavior. "Affirmative," he managed, his translator rendering his nervous clicking into standard galactic common. "Study group. In the library, where there are witnesses and security personnel." She laughed, that sharp, barking sound that humans made when amused, and disappeared into the corridor. The campus of Universal Collegiate Institute sprawled across several square kilometers of meticulously maintained grounds, walkways made of some composite material that was supposedly indestructible, a claim that would be tested before the night was done. Connected various academic buildings, residence halls, and recreational facilities. Everything was designed with universal accessibility in mind, which meant ramps for species with wheels, atmospheric adjustment stations for those who required different gas mixtures, and reinforced floors for species whose gravity requirements exceeded standard. For Rip, it all felt a bit like walking through a museum. Beautiful, sterile, and utterly devoid of anything interesting. She'd tried explaining to her roommate, a lovely Pelixian named Zora, whose species communicated primarily through bioluminescent patterns, that back home, the walk from class involved navigating around construction, avoiding aggressive geese in the campus park, and occasionally helping campus security catch the raccoons that had figured out how to open the dining hall doors. Here, the most dangerous thing she'd encountered was a maintenance bot that had gotten confused and kept asking her to validate her existence credentials. The evening air was comfortable, temperature regulated to be pleasant for the widest range of species. The local star was setting, painting the sky in shades that Earth's sunset would call amateur hour. 2 of Praxis 7's 3 moons were already visible, hanging in the sky like decorative ornaments placed by an overeager designer. Rip pulled out her communication device, a clunky thing compared to Earth tech but compatible with galactic networks, and checked her messages. One from her advisor reminding her about cultural sensitivity training, again. 2 from classmates asking if she could explain human athletic capabilities for their xenobiology projects, again. And 1 from her mom asking if she was eating enough and reminding her that aliens probably didn't understand proper nutrition. She smiled and typed back a quick response while walking, a habit that would have gotten her killed in certain Earth cities, but here posed 0 risk because the paths were all clearly marked and nobody was going to jump out. And the attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Later, when campus security reviewed the footage, or what remained of it, they would identify the assailants as members of a Krillix hunting pack. The Krillix, native to a Class 7 world on the Outer Rim, were known throughout the galaxy as trackers, mercenaries, and general-purpose violent solutions to problems that required violent solutions. They stood roughly 7 feet tall on digitigrade legs, possessed 4 arms ending in retractable claws, and had earned their reputation through centuries of successful hunts across dozens of worlds. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Throcknall, had been tracking Rip for 3 weeks. His pack had been hired by parties unknown, though investigations would later point toward a consortium of species who felt humanity's admission to galactic society was premature and potentially catastrophic. To eliminate the human student and make it look like an unfortunate accident, they had studied her, watched her patterns, noted that she walked alone after evening classes, that she took the same route back to her dormitory, that she appeared to be completely unaware of her surroundings while staring at her communication device. She was, in their professional assessment, an easy mark. This assessment would prove to be catastrophically incorrect. Throcknall dropped from the roof of the Materials Science Building, his 3 pack mates emerging from carefully chosen positions to create a perfect kill box. They'd timed it perfectly. The nearest security patrol was 6 minutes away. The surveillance cameras in this section could be jammed for 45 seconds before triggering alerts, and their target was distracted and isolated. Rip looked up from her phone. Her eyes met Throcknall's for exactly half a second, and in that brief moment, the hunter experienced something he'd never felt in 40 years of successful kills. Recognition, not of him specifically, but of what he represented. This human, this supposed soft species student from a backward planet, had just identified him as a threat with the same casual immediacy that he'd identified countless prey items throughout his career. Then she moved. The surveillance camera on the northwest corner of the quad captured 3 seconds of footage before something, later analysis would conclude it was Rip's thrown datapad, struck its lens with sufficient force to shatter the protective casing. The camera on the east side recorded 4 seconds before a Krillix body crashed into it. The south camera managed 7 seconds before an incredible amount of debris somehow reached it, despite being mounted 15 feet off the ground. The west camera, rated for military-grade durability and positioned with clear sight lines, transmitted footage for a full 8 seconds before mysteriously going offline in a manner that the technical report would describe as physically improbable. What those cameras captured in their brief operational windows would be analyzed by 6 different combat analysis teams, 3 xenobiology departments, and 1 very concerned insurance adjuster. Throcknall's opening strike, a 4-armed grapple meant to immobilize and crush, encountered a target that simply wasn't there anymore. Rip had dropped and rolled, a maneuver so instinctive that she'd probably performed it before her conscious mind had finished processing "threat detected." She came up with her bag in one hand, swinging it in an arc that connected with the knee joint of one of the pack members, with a wet crunching sound that transcended species in its universal message of, "That's broken now." The Krillex, later identified as Scar, went down hard. His howl of pain cut short when Rip's follow-up kick caught him in what most species agreed was probably a head, though Krillex anatomy was notoriously difficult to parse in real-time combat. "Are you kidding me?" Rip's voice carried across the quad, pitched with more annoyance than fear. "I have a midterm tomorrow." She ducked under a claw swipe from the second attacker, stepped inside his reach, a move that every combat manual in the galaxy advised against when fighting a larger opponent, and did something with her elbow that the footage analysts would watch 17 times trying to understand. The Krillex stumbled backward, his breathing apparatus making sounds it was definitely not designed to make. Throcknall recalibrated. The report said humans were durable, aggressive, creative fighters. The reports had not adequately conveyed the sheer feral intensity that a human could generate when annoyed. He signaled his remaining packmate, Vexthar, to coordinate. They attacked in unison, a practiced maneuver that had never failed. Rip grabbed a decorative stone from the landscaping border, a smooth, ovoid rock about the size of a grapefruit that some campus designer had placed for aesthetic purposes, and threw it. Humans, the galactic community had learned through careful study, had evolved several unusual traits: bipedalism, endurance hunting, complex language. But perhaps the most overlooked was their ability to throw objects with terrifying accuracy and force. Millions of years of evolution had fine-tuned human shoulders, elbows, and neural processing to transform rocks, spears, and baseballs into lethal projectiles. The rock caught Vexithar in the center of his thorax, traveling at approximately 47 miles per hour. He went down like someone had cut his strings, making a sound that would later be described by witnesses as somewhere between a wheeze and a whimper. "You interrupted study time," Rip continued, her voice reaching that particular pitch of human anger that sat just below shouting, but somehow conveyed even more threat. "Do you know how hard temporal mathematics is? Do you?" She punctuated this question by ducking another attack from Throcknall, grabbing his extended arm and using his own momentum to redirect him into a nearby bench with enough force to crack the supposedly indestructible composite material. The surveillance camera on the library building, 50 meters away and pointed in the wrong direction, somehow caught a glimpse of Throcknall struggling to his feet. The timestamp would show this was 12 seconds into the encounter. By 20 seconds, all 4 Krillex were on the ground in various states of incapacitation. Rip stood in the center of the quad, breathing hard but not winded, her bag somehow still on her shoulder, though now featuring several new tears and what appeared to be someone else's blood. Her hair had come loose from its tie. Her clothes were torn. She had a scratch on her cheek that was bleeding slightly. She looked absolutely furious. "Seriously?" She addressed the groaning Krillex at her feet. "You couldn't have waited until after finals. I'm already stressed enough without adding attempted murder to my evening." Throcknall, through considerable effort, managed to raise one hand in what most species would recognize as a gesture of submission. "How?" he wheezed in Galactic Common, his translator struggling with his damaged breathing apparatus. "Are you this strong?" Rip blinked at him. "I'm not strong. I'm from Earth. I'm literally average." This statement would haunt xenobiology departments for months. The sound of security vehicles approaching finally registered. Rip looked around the quad properly for the first time, taking in the broken cameras, the damaged landscaping, the unconscious assailants, and the small crowd of students who'd emerged from buildings at a safe distance. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh, this looks bad." She pulled out her phone, cracked now but still functional because human engineering had learned to account for human accident rates, and called the one number she'd been told to use only in emergencies. "Hi, Dean Morlex. It's Rip. Yeah, I know it's late. So, funny story about my walk home. The response team that arrived consisted of campus security, medical personnel, a representative from the Interstellar Incident Response Committee, and, for reasons nobody would adequately explain, a legal team whose fees could probably purchase a small moon. They found 4 Krillix hunters, members of a species that had successfully tracked and eliminated targets across dozens of worlds, incapacitated in various creative ways. They found one human student sitting on a bench, filling out an incident report on her cracked datapad with the same expression someone might have while completing routine paperwork. The head of security, a Volmoxian named Grexor, whose species had evolved from pack hunters and prided themselves on understanding violence, approached Rip with his weapon drawn but pointed safely at the ground. "Miss Morrison?" he said carefully. "Are you injured?" Rip looked up from her report. Oh, just this scratch. It's nothing." "That's a Class 3 laceration." "Yeah, well, on Earth we call it Tuesday." She returned to her datapad. "How do you spell Krillix? Is it with a K or a C?" "K." Grexor holstered his weapon, a gesture that his subordinates would later question. "Miss Morrison, you just defeated 4 professional hunters in under 30 seconds. "Did I?" Rip frowned. "Felt longer. Anyway, they attacked me first. That's self-defense, right? I read the campus safety guidelines. Chapter 7, Subsection 4. Students have the right to defend themselves against physical threats using reasonable force." "Reasonable force?" Grexor repeated slowly, gesturing at the destruction surrounding them. "Is typically interpreted as force proportional to the threat. They had claws. I had landscaping rocks. Seems proportional to me." One of the medical technicians, a brave soul named Pixlor, approached with a medical scanner. "Miss Morrison, I need to assess your injuries." "I'm fine, really." "You're bleeding from 17 different lacerations, your cardiac rate is elevated, and your bloodstream contains enough adrenaline to kill most species." Rip looked down at herself, noticing the damage properly for the first time. "Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe some bandages would be good." While Pixlor worked, muttering in his native language about Deathworlder physiology and insufficient medical school preparation, the investigative team documented the scene. Each broken camera was cataloged, each impact point measured, each damaged surface analyzed. The preliminary report, filed at 1947 station time, would include the phrase, "comprehensive systems failure across all surveillance equipment," and "possible equipment malfunction during altercation." The amended report, filed 3 hours later after engineers examined the wreckage, would include considerably more technical language that basically translated to, "The human broke everything, possibly on purpose," though she claims she didn't even notice the cameras. Throcknall and his pack were loaded onto medical transport sleds, still conscious enough to answer preliminary questions. The hunter leader, his professional pride severely damaged along with several internal organs, managed to rasp out a statement to the security team. "She smiled," he said, his eyes unfocused from pain medication. "Right before the end. The human smiled." The security officer taking his statement, a junior analyst named Trelnix, who'd only been on the job for 6 weeks, checked his translator. Smiled, as in the human expression of pleasure or amusement. the human expression of recognizing a worthy hunt. Throcknall's head lolled to the side. We were not hunting her. She was permitting us to try. This statement would be included in the report, then quietly moved to an appendix, then deleted entirely when it became clear that keeping it in the official record would raise uncomfortable questions about threat assessment protocols. By the time Rip was cleared to leave, after giving statements to 4 different departments, signing 7 different legal forms, and promising to attend 3 different counseling sessions, word had spread across campus. Students lined the walkways, maintaining respectful distances, but watching with a mixture of awe, terror, and confused admiration. Kexlar waited near the security office, his carapace shifting through several shades of nervous purple. When Rip emerged, bandaged but mobile, he chittered softly. "You are unharmed?" His translator rendered his concern clearly. "Yeah, I'm good." Rip adjusted her damaged bag. "Gonna have to get a new data pad, though, and probably some new clothes. You were attacked by professional killers." "I know, right? Super rude." She started walking toward the dorms, and Kexlar fell into step beside her, maintaining his careful distance. "And on a Tuesday. Everyone knows you don't schedule violence on Tuesdays. Is there a preferred day for violence on your world?" "Fridays usually, or Saturday nights. Tuesday is just bad planning." They walked in silence for a moment before Kexlar worked up the courage to ask the question that would appear in 17,000 student messages over the next hour. "How did you defeat them so easily?" Rip stopped walking. She turned to look at her friend, her expression genuinely confused. "Kex, they attacked one person. One. Do you know what we call that on Earth? We call it poor odds for the attackers." She resumed walking. "Humans don't fight fair. We fight to win. And we've been doing it for millions of years on a planet that spent every single day trying to kill us." "But you're a student, an academic." "Yeah? So? So you study mathematics and temporal theory, not combat." Rip laughed that sharp human laugh. "Kex, buddy, every human knows how to fight. It's like knowing how to swim or ride a bike. It's just basic stuff." This statement would be included in 17 different xenobiology papers over the next semester. They reached her dormitory building, where additional security had been posted. The guards nodded nervously as she approached, one of them holding the door open with the careful respect normally reserved for unexploded ordnance. "See you tomorrow?" Rip asked Kexlar. "Study group is still on, right? You wish to continue normal activities after experiencing a lethal threat?" "Well, yeah, I still have that midterm. Can't let attempted murder get in the way of my GPA." She disappeared into the building, leaving Kexlar standing in the courtyard, his entire worldview quietly reorganizing itself around new and terrifying information about humanity. Inside the security office, 3 levels down in the administrative building, Dean Morlex, a Threnodian whose species had managed galactic education policy for 6 centuries, reviewed footage, reports, and preliminary damage assessments with the expression of someone watching their career catch fire. "How much?" he asked the insurance representative. "For the cameras? Approximately 40,000 credits. And the repairs to the walkway composite? 60,000. It's a specialized material. And the medical costs for the Krillex? 170,000, though their employer will likely be billed for that." Dean Morlex pulled up the cost-benefit analysis he'd done before approving the human exchange program. The potential benefits: improved interspecies relations, valuable research opportunities, enhanced institutional reputation, had seemed to outweigh the risks. That analysis had not included a line item for student defeats professional assassins, destroys campus infrastructure, and traumatizes security staff. "Sir?" His assistant, a young Pelixian named Styx, gestured to the display. "We're receiving communication requests from 47 different media outlets. The Terran Diplomatic Corps, the Krillix Hunting Guild, 3 academic journals, and someone claiming to represent human fight compilation channels asking for footage rights." "Deny them all." "Even the Terran Diplomatic Corps?" "Especially them." Morlech stood, his thorax creaking with the weight of bureaucratic stress. "And send a message to the IG-back committee. I want Earth's classification reviewed." "Sir, it's already classified as Class 11. "I know. I want it moved to Class 12. That's reserved for planets where the environment itself exhibits hostile intelligence." Morlech gestured at the screen, showing Rip's student file, her academic record, her clubs and interests. A normal student in every measurable way, except for the part where she just dismantled professional killers like they were training dummies. "Tell me," he said slowly, "how exactly would you describe a planet that produces beings capable of that?" He pointed at the footage. "And considers it average?" Styx had no answer. The report that would eventually reach the IG-back committee included several recommendations. Enhanced security protocols for Deathworld students. Mandatory combat assessment before approval of exchange programs. Additional insurance requirements. Psychological counseling resources for faculty and students who witness Deathworld capabilities in action. And, buried in an appendix that would be marked classified and restricted to committee members only, a single-line observation from Dean Morlech himself. The cameras weren't destroyed by accident. The human eliminated surveillance systematically while defending herself, displaying tactical awareness that suggests military training or combat instinct. When questioned, she claimed she wasn't paying attention to the cameras. This assessor believes the human was, in fact, paying attention to everything. Recommendation: humans possess threat assessment capabilities that exceed our measurement parameters. Reclassification advised. In her dorm room, Rip sat on her bed while her roommate Zora pulsed through several colors of concern and curiosity. The bioluminescent patterns were easier to read now, after 3 months of practice. "I'm fine," Rip assured her. "Really, just some scrapes." Zora's patterns shifted to questioning orange. "I don't know why they attacked me. Wrong place, wrong time, maybe." More patterns. Disbelief, concern, curiosity. "Okay, yes, I fought back. What was I supposed to do? Let them kill me? I have a 3.8 GPA to maintain." Zora's colors shifted to something that Rip had learned translated roughly to, "Humans are terrifying, and I'm glad you're my friend and not my enemy." "Thanks, Zora. You're pretty great too." She pulled out her backup datapad. Because of course she had a backup. She was a college student. And opened her study materials for tomorrow's midterm. Temporal mathematics, bootstrap paradoxes, and causal loops. The kind of theoretical problems that bent your brain in interesting ways. Much more interesting than 4 assassins who'd made the tactical error of assuming that because she was a student, she'd forgotten how to fight. On Earth, Rip's mother received a carefully worded message from the university administration, assuring her that her daughter was safe. The situation was under control, and absolutely no media outlets would be receiving any footage of the incident. On the Krillix homeworld, the Hunting Guild received a report of failure that would circulate through their networks for years, accompanied by increasingly embellished accounts of what had actually happened. On 17 different worlds, xenobiology students began writing papers about human combat capabilities, persistence hunting, and the evolutionary advantages of coming from a death world. And on Praxis 7, In the quiet hours after midnight, when 3 moons hung in the sky like decorative ornaments, campus security finalized their new protocols for monitoring Deathworld students, which included the somewhat desperate notation: if cameras are destroyed during incident, assume student is fine and attackers are not. The universe, in all its infinite wisdom and spectacular poor judgment, had learned an important lesson that day. Well, several lessons actually. First, classification systems worked great on paper, but terrible when confronted with reality. Second, average was a relative term that needed significant context when discussing species from Deathworlds. Third, humans smiled when they recognized a challenge, and if you saw that smile while attacking one, you had already lost. And fourth, most importantly, never, ever interrupt a human student during exam week. They were already stressed enough without adding attempted murder to their evening schedule. The next morning, Rip showed up to her temporal mathematics midterm exactly on time, sat in her usual seat, and proceeded to ace the exam, while 3/4 of her classmates were too distracted by her presence to focus on bootstrap paradoxes. Professor Thren Nix, distributing the test materials with his eye stalks, carefully avoiding direct line of sight with Rip, made a mental note to add "survived Deathworlder encounter" to his list of academic accomplishments. In the hallway outside, 2 new cameras had been installed overnight. They were rated for military operations and cost more than most students' yearly tuition. They had been positioned with careful attention to coverage angles and redundancy. They would last approximately 6 weeks before the next incident, which would involve 3 drunk Gorlaxian students making poor life choices, a campus dare, and Rip's increasingly famous right hook. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. For now, the human exchange program continued, the cameras watched, and the galaxy slowly adjusted to the uncomfortable reality that humans, average, normal, completely unremarkable humans, were exactly as terrifying as their planet's classification suggested. The bureaucrats at the IG-BAC committee received Dean Morlex's report, filed it appropriately, and quietly updated Earth's classification to Class 12. Nobody argued with the change. After all, they'd seen the footage. Or rather, they'd seen the footage until it stopped, which told them everything they needed to know about the species that had destroyed it while defending themselves with what they considered reasonable force. The universe continued to spin. Classes continued, students studied, socialized, and carefully avoided annoying the human student who'd already demonstrated what happened to people who interrupted her evening. And somewhere, in the debris of broken cameras and shattered surveillance equipment, lay the scattered remains of the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about what civilized society actually meant when you invited a Deathworlder to participate in it. Rip finished her exam, handed it to the professor, and walked out into another pleasant day on Praxis 7. Where the weather was always nice, the local fauna was aggressively docile, and the surveillance cameras followed her with the nervous attention usually reserved for tracking natural disasters. She pulled out her phone, texted her mom that she'd aced the midterm, and headed to the cafeteria for lunch.